So good morning, everybody. Welcome to Church in Ocean Park, and thank you for your patience. I'm Dr. Kim Harris, and a proud member of the Church in Ocean Park. But I may have to slip out on you and ask you all to keep Reggie, and y'all know Reggie. Keep his sister in prayer and in good thoughts as she makes her transition on to the next world. So he's going to come pick me up. We're going to go and be with her. So we are very thrilled this morning to have Larry Dilge, who's going to be leading music, and some other wonderful people that are going to be doing readings and pinch hitting for certain things. So thank you all so much. So Larry, if you would get us going, please.
Oh, you're ready to go already? Okay, hold on.
We are ready. It is 10:16. Woohoo!
Yeah, we are all set to go.
All right, I'm not quite as set, but I will be set in just a minute here.
Okay.
I'm going to start.
And today is the first of two wonderful Sundays, and Bob, you're going to tell us about that when the time comes.
Yes, sorry.
Okay, I'm going to start with the song that Dr. Kim would have started with, Streets of London, a song by Ralph McTell, written in 1970. Have you heard the old man in the closed down market, kicking up the papers with his worn out shoes? In his eyes you see no pride, and held loosely at his side, yesterday's paper telling yesterday's news. So how can you tell me that you're lonely, and say for you that the sun don't shine? Let me take you by the hand and lead you to the streets of London. I'll show you something that'll make you change your mind. Have you seen the old girl who walks the streets of London? Dirt in her hair and her clothes in rags. She's no time for talking, she just keeps right on walking, carrying her home into carrier bags. So how can you tell me that you're lonely, and say for you that the sun don't shine? Let me take you by the hand and lead you through the streets of London. I'll show you something to make you change your mind. In the all-night cafe at 11:15, same old man sitting here on his own, looking at the world over the rim of his teacup. Each tea lasts an hour, and he wanders home alone. So how can you tell me that you're lonely, and say for you that the sun don't shine? Let me take you by the hand and lead you through the streets of London. I'll show you something to make you change your mind. Have you seen the old man outside the Seaman's Mission? Memory fading with the ribbons that he wears. In our winter city, the rain cries a little pity for one more forgotten hero and a world that doesn't care. So how can you tell me that you're mourning, and say for you that the sun don't shine? Let me take you by the hand and lead you through the streets of London. I'll show you something that'll make you change your mind.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this wonderful church, the Church in Ocean Park. If you don't believe in God, or if you do believe in God, or you don't know what to believe, you are welcome. Agnostic, atheist, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, pagan, Zoroastrian, Sikh, spiritualist, a New Ager, whatever your path, come on in. Whatever your sexual orientation, however you identify, you are most welcome. Single, married, divorced, widowed, come join us. Whatever your age range, come on in. Economically, if you're middle class, you're welcome. If you have so much money you don't know what to do with it, you're welcome. This church can use some donations. Or if you're poor or extremely poor, please join us. If you feel that you're undereducated, couldn't get through high school, you're most welcome. Or if you have 6 PhDs, come on in. Wherever you're coming from, whatever your mood is this morning, come on in. Welcome to the church in Ocean Park.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Dr. Kim, for leading us on to our service today. We are happy to be here once more. And you may be wondering, who is this person? I'm Joseph Hepburn, and I am a chaplain. Well, I chaplained at UCLA Medical Center for 10 years, and I'm now doing per diem after my retirement. I'm doing per diem chaplaincy at Kaiser's Hospital in East Hollywood. So I am here carrying on with some great help from the people of the church in Ocean Park. I'm here carrying on while our minister, Reverend Janet McKeithen, is away on sabbatical. So we are continuing the great work that she has left us to do. So today, we are going to be a little short. You may be wondering too, where is our musician? Well, Dr. Kim will have to leave very soon for an emergency. And then Louise will be absent as well. She's away. And Jean Gasca is also away. So we are a little depleted today, but we are going to carry on. Carry on. So welcome, welcome, welcome. The church in Ocean Park. Now, before we continue, we have a land acknowledgement, which I will read. We, the people of the church in Ocean Park, recognize that our building in Santa Monica, California, sits on stolen land. We, the settlers of this land, honor the Quiche, the Tongva, and the Chumash peoples. We acknowledge the harms of genocide, enslavement, forced assimilation, and gender violence, destruction of sacred sites, the burial of historic truths, and indigenous suffering at the hands of US settler colonialism. We also acknowledge that our communities and country were built on the backs of people stolen from Africa, placed into bondage, and forced into labor. We acknowledge that we benefit from that labor that has never been repaid. In acknowledgement, let us then commit ourselves to healing by helping to create a more just and equitable world. Let us commit ourselves to this change. Let us commit ourselves at this moment by helping to create a more just and equitable world through the struggle of changing how we do things that we see as normal, that support the systems that oppress people. So we apologize for that harm by placing ourselves and pledging ourselves to be part of the culture of repair. Thanks. Now we have our usual chant by Thich Nhat Hanh. We repeat it 3 times. I have arrived, I am home, in the here and in the now, 3 times. So after 3, 1, 2, 3. I have arrived, I am a home, in the here and in the now. I have arrived, I am a home, in the here and in the now. I have arrived, I am a home, in the here and in the now. And thank you. So we are going to carry on at this point with Bob Gord.
Thank you, Joseph. Good morning, everybody. I want to let you know that today's service is part of a two service combination. The topic for both services, one today and the next one 2 weeks from today, the topic is poverty, and specifically poverty here in the US. It's a tough topic. There's a lot of sadness associated with it, certainly. But I wanted you to know that today we will be focusing on the nature of poverty, what it's like being poor in this country, and also on some of the causes. But 2 weeks from now, our guest speaker will be Nell Myhand, and I'm so thankful that she is with us this morning. She will be speaking on solutions to the problem of poverty. So there will be an upside to this, our dealing with this difficult topic. One other thing I want to say, it has to do with faith traditions. As Bonnie made very clear to us all, we are a multi-faith church. Poverty is certainly something that many faiths of the world have things to say about. It's a great deal, say, in the Judeo-Christian, in the Bible, about poverty, and in many other traditions. But what is said can be quite variable, even within a given faith tradition. For instance, within Christianity, which happens to be the tradition I know most about, I know that in some churches, poverty is not really considered a problem. It's just sort of part of the world that God has made. Whereas in other forms of Christianity, Christianity is seen as a problem that needs to be solved. In other words, poverty is seen as something that it's our responsibility to try to abolish. Other faith traditions also have people who want to do away with poverty. So our speakers are not speaking on poverty from any particular faith tradition, but they both align with members of many traditions who are of the persuasion that poverty is not something we should accept, but is something that we need to try to abolish. With that said, Craig Ali will do a reading for us, which is excerpted from a book called Poverty by America, very recently published book by Matthew Desmond. And I'll also mention that the Committee for Racial Justice Book Group has read the book and we have discussed it. And I recommend it to anyone. But Craig,
Thank you.
let's hear from you.
What poverty is? Poverty is pain, physical pain. Poverty is the colostomy bag and wheelchair, the night terrors and bullets that maimed but didn't finish their cunning work. Poverty is trauma. Poverty is instability. Poverty is the constant fear that it will get even worse. Poverty is the loss of liberty. Poverty is the feeling that your government is against you, not for you. That your country was designed to serve other people and that you are fated to be managed and processed, roughed up and handcuffed. Poverty is embarrassment and shame. Poverty is diminished life and personhood. What poverty is.
Let us pause in life's pleasures and count its many tears, while we all sup sorrow with the poor. There's a song that will linger forever in our ears. Oh, hard times come again no more. 'Tis the song, the sigh of the weary. Hard times come again no more. Many days you have lingered around my cabin door. Oh, hard times come again no more. There's a pale drooping maiden who toils her life away, with a worn heart whose better days are o'er. Though her voice would be merry, 'tis sighing all the day. Oh, hard times come again no more. 'Tis the song, the sigh of the weary. Hard times come again no more. Many days you have lingered around my cabin door. Oh, hard times come again no more. 'Tis a sigh that is wafted across the troubled wave. 'Tis a wail that is heard upon the shore. 'Tis a dirge that is murmured around the lowly grave. Oh, hard times come again no more. 'Tis the song, the sigh of the weary. Hard times come again no more. Many days you have lingered around my cabin door. Oh, hard times come again no more. While we seek mirth and beauty and music bright and gay, there are frail forms fainting at the door. Though their voices are silent, their pleading looks still say, oh, hard times come again no more. 'Tis the song, the sigh of the weary. Hard times come again no more. Many days you have lingered around my cabin door. Oh, hard times come again no more. Thanks, Mimi.
Wonderful song, wonderful song. So appropriate for today's message. Now we'll have Bob to introduce the speaker.
Thank you, Joseph. Our speaker this morning is Will GORDH. Will is an LA-based filmmaker who has written, directed, and produced a wide variety of projects over the last 20 years. For the past few years, Will has been the lead director, showrunner, and writer for the progressive satirical news show, Some More News with Cody Johnson. Will's talk today is partly based on a script he wrote for one of those shows about how it's so expensive to be poor in this country. And I might mention that that show got out to over 600,000 people. In fact, it had 620 something thousand views so far. So Will is doing his part to get the word out about important social justice topics. Will also is my son, and I'm very proud of him. Okay, Will.
Thank you, Dad. I appreciate that. And thanks to all of you. I'm more used to being behind the camera than I am to being in front of it. So I appreciate you all listening to me today. I've got some notes and want to talk to you about this topic. I was first interested in exploring this topic because of the disconnect between the national narrative, particularly coming from conservative folks, about the nature of poverty and what the real truth was about the causes and nature of poverty. From the conservative side, the narrative is that being poor in America is actually pretty cushy, that, that we give poor people free stuff. We make it a little too easy to be poor in America. But the truth is that there's a really cruel paradox to the way that the poverty system functions, which is that it's actually incredibly expensive to be poor. So I decided to write a script about this topic and to explore that idea, to look at why is that the case, how does that system function, and ultimately why is that the case. And so I started out by reaching out to some of our subscribers to see if they'd had any experience. This is for the show that I direct, to see what their personal experience with this phenomenon was. And so I'm going to read some of those responses throughout this presentation. So one subscriber wrote that my parents had to constantly buy junk cars and would spend thousands a year to keep them going. The fear of breaking down was always there. Another person wrote, my 4-year-old needs glasses, $100 for cheap kids glasses. It's $100 for the cheapest kids glasses. 4-year-olds are bad at taking care of glasses. They break after 2 weeks. If we spent $500 on a decent pair, we'd only need to spend that once. Another person wrote, I went for a checkup, paid for out of pocket, and was told my wisdom teeth were completely sideways and they would need surgery to remove, but as I had no coverage, could not get it done. I instead lived with the pain of impacted wisdom teeth until one broke the molar in front of it, causing an emergency surgery they could not turn me down for. This medical debt hung over me in collection for almost a decade. I started, and as I got some of these responses, I started seeing a variety of patterns, one of which can sort of be summed down to what has come to be known as the Boots theory of socioeconomic unfairness. It comes from a novel called Men at Arms by an author named Terry Pratchett. And here's a short excerpt from that book, referencing a character named Samuel Vines, who said, "A really good pair of leather boots cost $50, but an affordable pair of boots, which were sort of okay for a season or two, and then leaked like hell when the cardboard gave out, cost about $10. A man who could afford $50 had a pair of boots that'd still be keeping his feet dry in 10 years' time, while a poor man who could only afford cheap boots would have spent $100 on boots in the same time and would still have wet feet." That's one component of the idea that being poor is expensive. You can sort of extend that idea to things like the ability to buy in bulk. You can buy things in bulk, you can save a lot of money. But if you don't, if you don't have extra income, you have to buy, one roll of toilet paper at a time, and that costs a whole lot more money. But before I go into some of the other reasons, I want to point out that the nature being being poor, being so expensive, the reason that's such a big deal, of course, is because it makes it very hard to escape. It creates an avalanche. It's that snowball turns into an avalanche. So here's an example. One of our other subscribers said, "I used to alternate between eating one day and adding gas to my car on the next. Never had more than 1 to 2 gallons in my tank. One time, my roommate's car broke down. They needed a ride to work to avoid being fired. I didn't eat for 4 days so I could keep working and catch back up." The fact that being poor is so costly means that people have to triage their life. They have to prioritize pay gas, eat. So I thought one place to start, Matthew Desmond's description of poverty that Craig read is how it feels, but how do we define it in our system of laws, for example? In the 1960s, we actually created definition for poverty in America, and a way to measure it. And so according to the US Census Bureau, the official poverty rate in 2021 is about 11.6% of the population, with 37 million people living in poverty. But it's important to note that they haven't actually updated the way they calculate that number, and it doesn't take into account the cost of living based on geography. And according to other studies, the number is much, much higher in terms of the people who live in a way that they can't have their basic needs met. And nearly 51 million households in America don't earn enough money, earn enough to afford a monthly budget that includes housing, food, childcare, healthcare, transportation. What are some of the other ways that being poorer is expensive? Well, one of the main ways is, it may seem a little obvious to say, but when you're poor, you don't have a whole lot of money. And you still have needs. And so how do you make up that difference? Well, it turns out that a lot of people need to borrow money, and that creates debt, of course. And if you're a wealthy person, you don't need to borrow that money. Say we're talking about a car, $1,000 car. A rich person could probably get a deal, say, I'll spend all that money up front. But someone who has to take out a loan, if they even qualify, that's another story, is going to have to pay that off over years, and that interest is going to accumulate. In fact, Americans pay $120 billion in interest and fees every year. That's just interest and fees. That's not even for the thing that they're purchasing. This is regards to credit card debt. Of course, credit card debt, loans, those aren't the only sorts of debt. One of the other biggest forms of debt, of course, is medical debt, because for a certain reason, we live in a country that doesn't provide healthcare to our citizens, but has them pay for it on the private market. And so about 100 million people in America today, about 41% of adults have massive medical debt. And of course, that medical debt and the fear of accumulating that medical debt causes folks to not seek care, which is why it's not surprising that poor folks live 10 to 15 years less long than people who aren't poor. So it's not just expensive to be poor, it's very costly in other ways. Of course, debt means that you make enough money to even qualify for a loan. There are about 16% of Americans that have no credit score at all, and millions of Americans who don't have a bank account. That means not only that they have to pay money at a check cashing place, a certain percentage, to even get the money that they've earned. It also creates a huge time burden, because if you don't have a bank account paying for things like utilities, you have to go down to the the gas company in person on your lunch break to pay for those bills. So it's not just expensive financially to be poor, but it's incredibly time consuming. Here's one of our subscribers wrote, because my paychecks were low and my bills all seemed to hit at the same time, I started accumulating overdraft fees, $35 per check. The bank was taking fees out because I couldn't pay the fees they were taking out. There's a lot of cruel ironies about being poor. Some of these accumulated effects cause more desperate behavior and puts poor people at the mercy of even more predatory institutions such as payday lenders. Here's another subscriber said, I needed a car repair, and it was urgent because I couldn't work without my car. I had no credit card, so I went to a payday loan to get around $100. Because of the massive interest on payday loans, I ended up not being able to make it to the next paycheck and had to take out another payday loan of slightly less before my next paycheck. This loop continued for a little over a year until I was finally caught up. It cost me over $1,000 worth of interest in the end. Couple big points that I want to make before I close. There are different types of poverty, it's important to note, and they're not all the same. And what I'm referring to is something called concentrated poverty, when we're not just talking about the poverty of an individual, but we're talking about the poverty of communities. And when that poverty is concentrated, the impact is even more severe. When you have a mixed socioeconomic status community where there's some poor people, some middle-class people, some wealthier people, there's more economic activity. When poverty is concentrated, nobody has enough money to buy anything. So there are no shops that set up in those areas for people to buy anything. And it's worth noting that the communities that are beset by concentrated poverty are typically formerly redlined communities created intentionally by the US government through our housing policy. So it's not just expensive to be, being poor, it's also expensive to be Black. Let me just put it that way, because the history of discrimination in America, let me quote an author named Dorothy Brown who put it quite well. She wrote a book called The Whiteness of Wealth. She says, Blacks graduate from college with more debt, do not get jobs as easily as white people, are not paid the same wages as their equally qualified white peers, are steered towards lower paying jobs and have an unemployment rate twice that of whites, yet are more likely to provide financial support for extended family. What that means is wealth was afforded to white folks through many policies such as the GI Bill throughout history and denied to Black people. So young Black middle class people today are less likely to inherit wealth and more likely that they're going to have to support their aging parents who are much more likely to be in poverty. And it's worth noting that even middle class, even higher earning Black people have less wealth than on average than lower income white Americans because of that generational wealth. Final point I'll make is that we don't just make it expensive to be poor, we also make it a crime. There's a law in Missouri recently that created a penalty of up to $750 for someone to sleep underneath the bridge on state land. After the Michael Brown case in Ferguson, the DOJ did a report and found that the city was using their police force to fund the government by dropping fines on all of their citizens. The reason Sandra Bland spent that weekend in jail is because she couldn't afford the $500 to pay for bail. So ultimately, that cost her life. There's one more quote I want to read from a subscriber. I got pulled over and ticketed for an improper lane change and missed the court date because my boss threatened to fire me from my minimum wage job. A warrant was issued for my arrest and I had to pawn or sell most of my possessions to post my $600 bail before a judge would let me have a new court date. My money minus the court fees and original $125 wasn't returned for nearly 3 months, and I lost 15 pounds rationing food to make rent, waiting for my money back. These are some of the ways that being poor is expensive, and I'll finish off by just with a couple quick points. One counter argument is, but don't we have a social safety net for poor people? Well, it turns out that there's an entire industry known as the poverty industry that in the book Daniel Hatcher wrote, he says that states and their human services agencies are partnering with private companies to form a vast poverty industry, turning America's most vulnerable population into a source of revenue. The resulting industry is strip mining billions in federal aid and other funds from impoverished families, abused and neglected children, and the disabled and elderly poor. We also make it very time consuming and throw up a lot of red tape for people to get any support at all. Finally, I'll leave you all with this thought. So the question is, why is this happening? And is it intentional? And I think that, there's a lot more time to discuss that question, but I found it interesting that if you recall, with the American Rescue Plan, we put in a policy called the Expanded Child Tax Credit. Gave families about $3,000 to $3,600 a year for folks who had children. The studies have shown that this policy cut child poverty by about 50% and had a whole downstream effects on the life quality of folks in America. There were lower instances of people using payday loans, pawn shops, selling blood plasma. People were more able to pay their bills, withstand emergency expenses, fewer evictions. Of course, with this hugely successful program, you would imagine that our politicians would have continued it, perhaps even expanded it, right? No, they just let it expire. And of course, the child poverty rate is rising again. Joe Manchin suggested that perhaps those families were using that money on drugs. So the point I want to make is this is intentional. It's not unnaturally poverty, and the fact that it's expensive to be poor is not a naturally occurring phenomenon. It's not the way the world was designed. It's the way we've all designed our system. Some folks have more influence on the design of that system than others, of course, but poverty in America is a choice. And, I can't say that this next quote is from a subscriber, but it's a quote from Martin Luther King, and that's always a good place to end things. He said in a speech, "There's nothing new about poverty. What is new is that we have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty. The real question is whether we have the will." So I'll leave you there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Will. A lot of new insights into the whole question of poverty. But before we go into our sharing, we're going to have a song by Larry Dilg. Now, in our sharing, I want to indicate that we should be brief because time is upon us. And so we need to be brief in our sharing. And just raise your hands, or if you can click on the part on your program there, if you can click and I can see your hand go up.
Thanks, Joseph. I'm going to sing a song from 1929, sung by Blind Alfred Reed. Just interestingly, Blind Alfred Reed was at the Bristol sessions, famous recording sessions where the Victor Company recorded Jimmie Rodgers and the Carter Family for the first time. It was the beginning of country music, sort of as we know it by listening to it. And Alfred Reed was there in 1929. He wrote this song called "How Can a Poor Man Stand Such Times and Live?" He was a Methodist lay preacher, not unlike Joseph, and he spent most of his life just living where he grew up in Virginia, and he died of starvation in 1956. There once was a time when everything was cheap, but now prices nearly puts a man to sleep. When we pay our grocery bill, we just feel like making our will. Tell me, how can a poor man stand such times and live? I remember when dry goods was as cheap as dirt. We could take 2 bits and buy a dandy shirt. Now we pay $3 or more, maybe get a shirt that another man wore. Tell me, how can a poor man stand such times and live? Well, I used to trade with a man by the name of Gray. Flour was 50 cents for a 24-pound bag. Now it's $1.50 beside, just like a skinning off a flea for the hide. Tell me, how can a poor man stand such times and live? Oh, the schools we have today ain't worth a cent, but they see to it that every child is sent. If we don't send every day, we have a heavy fine to pay. Tell me, how can a poor man stand such times and live? Prohibition's good if it's conducted right. There's no sense in shooting a man till he shows fight. Officers kill without a cause, then complain about funny laws. Tell me, how can a poor man stand such times and live? Most all preachers preach for gold and not for souls. That's what keeps a poor man always in a hole. We can't hardly get our breath, taxed and schooled and preached to death. Tell me, how can a poor man stand such times and live? Oh, it's time for everyone to be awake. We pay 50 cents a pound when we ask for steak. When we get our package home, a little wad of paper with gristle and bone. Tell me, how can a poor man stand such times and live? Well, the doctor comes around with a face all bright, and he says, in a little while you'll be all right. All he gives is a big humbug pill, a dose of dope, and a great big bill. Tell me, how does a poor man stand? How does a poor man stand? How can a poor man stand such times and live?
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, we're going to go into sharing. I saw Edward's hand up first. Edward?
Listen, thank you so much for that talk. It was wonderful and insightful. I just want to briefly talk about this friend of mine. He was our plumber, and he was a very generous guy. He worked out of his garage, and he had his van stolen, and his van had all his tools in it. And I told all his friends, I said, listen, we need to have a fundraiser for this guy, because if you have a small business and you have any kind of loss, it's very hard to get back on track. Well, he told me that his insurance covers some of it, but he still, he said he was okay. But I in my heart, I didn't believe him. Anyway, he was underneath the house and he bumped his head, which is normal if you ever done any kind of work. I used to work for the gas company, work under a house, and he hit his head on a floor joist. And because he didn't go to the hospital, well, I drove by where he worked, say hello to him, and they told me he had died. He had a brain aneurysm, and I just want, I'm just telling you this because I loved him. I never cried. My mother died, my brother died, a lot of different friends have died, and I've never cried. But when he died, the wonderfulness of this man, I cried like a baby. And so I know that if any of you ever have a friend and they're in need, please step up and help them out. It makes a big difference in some people's lives. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing that experience. Craig?
I too want to thank you, Will and Bob, for bringing this up, because this is something, that has to be addressed, and more time and resources and energy needs to be devoted to it. One of the things, though, when you mention in the book, Poverty by America, and I would like your comment on this, Will, is when we had a pandemic, the people who more or less were considered essential, essentially were folks who couldn't really afford not to be out of work. But at the same time, we had a serious pandemic putting themselves at risk. And I'm wondering specifically, what kind of things, if nothing else, to address where we were, could have been done to at least ease that whole question. Another comment is the young guy who got choked, obviously was in poverty, and he was needing something to eat and or drink. And, you know, the fact that he was in trauma and in a crisis didn't seem to matter, not just to many of the bus riders, but to the people who more or less, you know, put that in him. Clearly, that is a sense of poverty, and I'm hoping that, you know, some sort of dialogue could be addressed and focused on what we do, you know, when people are crying out for help within that.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. I mean, I think it's an interesting point. When during the pandemic, the folks that typically we were looking down on, all of a sudden were essential workers. Our economy depended on these folks, and we called them heroes. But the way that we really look, you know, society, not everybody, not the folks here, but a lot of society looks at those folks is the way they look at, you know, Neely on the subway train. You know, one of the other points, we make it not just a crime to be poor, we make it a crime to be unhoused, and we make it a crime to be mentally ill. The typical way that we deal with mental illness in America is through the criminal justice system, unfortunately. I mean, I think that just to briefly, you know, there's so many different causes. I mean, I think ways that we could address this. I think one of the main ways that you'll hear about is give people money. But another one of them is give people access to healthcare as well. But, you know, I do think that during the pandemic, some people's eyes were opened to, you know, the role that the so-called essential workers play, and there was some good policies, but we seem to be backsliding a little bit now.
Okay, Bob?
Will, you gave us quite a few examples to show that, strangely enough, poor people, you can make a lot of money off of poor people. And they are exploited as consumers a great deal. But I know in talking with you that you're also aware that poor people tend to be exploited also as workers. And I wonder if you could say something about the working poor in our society.
Sure. Yes. Yes, I think one of the reasons this dynamic continues, as you say, is that there's a lot of money to be made in taking advantage of poor people. They don't have a big, powerful lobby to fight on their behalf, for instance. But I think one of the other reasons that we maintain the system of poverty in America is because in some ways it serves as a cautionary tale for employers and bosses to take advantage of. See, if you don't accept this low wage, you may end up like, you know, these folks. You may there's a threat that's part that the continued existence of poverty is a threat to folks to accept what we say we'll give them and not ask for more. And it gives a lot of leverage to the rich and powerful, who frankly we subsidize. You know, one final quick point I'll make is that when they talk about the social safety net, giving it to the poor people, that's subsidy. Those are subsidies for large corporations who are not willing to pay their employees a living wage. The money that we're supporting Walmart when they won't pay a living wage when we're giving food stamps to their workers, for instance. So that's what I'll say about the labor component to poverty.
Okay, very, very insightful points. We'll go straight to Linda.
Thanks. I think this was really really interesting, and there's a whole lot in there. I just have to say that I was reminded of the Anatole France quote about the law and its majesty, and I found it, but treats rich and poor alike when they sleep under the bridge, or they beg, or they steal a loaf of bread, right? And the irony of that just reminded me of, well, I spent about 5 years of my life being poor enough to sell plasma and to get food stamps, and to send my husband at the time to the grocery store to use the food stamps to buy bread and milk and lettuce, while he stole steak and other things that he could slip behind his, inside his jacket and behind his back, right? I mean, in other words, you can't do that with milk and bread. And anyway, I mean, so a lot of other stuff, right? I think, payday lenders and all that stuff is certainly part of what I lived through and what we called the bad old days. But I was young. This was in the 60s, and I was young. And I think a lot of the cumulative effect of poverty, I didn't go to the dentist for 5 years, but when you're in your 20s and you don't go to the dentist for 5 years, and you'd had health dental care as a child, and then you spend 5 years without going to the dentist in your 20s, that's okay. But the cumulative effect of poverty on people's health, I think, is something that anyway, I know you know this, but I think that that's one of the things, and the healthcare system is part of that. But I hope at some point we get more in. I mean, I think for people who particularly don't have those experiences, this was a lot about how, and not that much about why, right? In other words, how is that set up? And I think, when Bob asked you to talk a little bit about the reserved army of the unemployed, which is a Marxist term for what unemployment does to keep everybody's wages down, we get into, in fact, that the system is set up that the poverty of poor folks is what enables the obscene riches and power of a very tiny minority, right? And they could not have all that without poverty and exploitation. And I say that as someone who worked in a garment factory in Chula Vista for a year, where nobody could afford to buy the clothes that we were producing. We have fed you all for 1,000 years, but here we are, unfed. Though there's never a dollar of all your wealth that marks the workers dead. We have yielded our best to give you rest, and you lie on crimson wool. And if blood be the price of all your wealth, good God, we have paid in full.
Yeah, I'll just make a quick point. This was a lot about how, but I think, the intentional design of capitalism is a big part of the why, because, it also is important that there are poor people, because it upholds it creates a justification for the rich. If there's poor people, you can say their choices cause their poverty, their worth caused their poverty. They deserve it, because if I'm rich, I earned it. But if they're poor, it's because they deserve it. And I think it does help justify that the idea that individual actions and behavior is the reason for the outcomes that we see in society, which upholds capitalism, and it upholds the basic ideas behind white supremacy, I would argue.
And I would just say as a teacher that the school system is part of that whole meritocracy lie.
Okay, quite so we can take two more. We see Trudy Goodwin.
Thanks, Reverend. I don't have anything really rich to share, but I did want to lift up the fact that probably about 6 years ago, I went through this financial downturn that created a lot of pain for me, my mom, and other members of my family. And I know what it's like to be in payday loan debt. You take out a loan for $1,000 thinking that'll catch up, help you catch up on your bills. And it took 6 years for me to pay that $1,000 off because of the principal. And it was embarrassing to admit to this church that I was going through this financial hardship. But the reason that I mentioned it was so that folks would know that in their very presence were people who were suffering, even though they would keep a smile on their face and, stay washed up and presentable as well as they could. And it isn't like these people will ask you for help. Some people can do that. Other people have too much training, home training or homeschooling that says you don't ask people for help, you work it out. So you end up pretty much going through this cycle of poverty alone. And I mean, this 6 year ago downturn for me was nothing, absolutely nothing compared to the years I went without food as a child in Texas when my mom was hospitalized and there was no money coming in. And I have to tell you, it was that situation, and I've probably said this before, that colored how I think about my responsibility to other people today. So at 72, it's hard for me to move away from serving folks who are in need because of that lasting impact that being malnourished in this country in 1955 placed on my heart.
Thank you so much for sharing. Despite all of that trauma, you are still able to overcome it and to help other people now who are in similar or even worse traumatic conditions. So we give thanks. So we're going to go to Mimi. Mimi, did you have your hand up?
I did. I'm going to leave something in the chat because thank you so much for that talk. It was amazing. And I heard something I never knew, Will, on one of those money shows on NPR. I think it was called The Uncertain Hour. You're nodding. You may have heard it. But the salient fact I heard was, they want these work requirements. That's what is being held out in these budget talks. We either go broke as America or we put more work requirements in. And it's the usual, the idle poor, they need to work to get their benefits. And then they did this show about a woman spoke about going in, how she lost one job. She had a baby like 2 months old and she goes into this place that's paid by our taxes to give her a job. She gets a job and she lost it, something about the baby, and it didn't, work. So she went in again to get another job that might not work. Every time she walks through the door, she found out $2,000 are paid to this firm. The firm's CEO makes $6 million a year. And as she pointed out, that's taxpayer money. I mean, why didn't they just give me the $2,000 when I walked in? Every poor person without a job walks through the door, $2,000 to the $6 million guy. I didn't know that. But when I now see these legislators going, they must have more work requirements, now I know who's paying them. And I didn't know that before. I thought it was an attitudinal problem about the idle poor. And I thought, well, we can change hearts and minds. No, once again, it's a big, huge industry, not just payday loans. This is, big money. And it made me furious. And I've just put it in the chat if you want to go listen to it. But that's a problem. And I'm glad that one of these big money shows or one of these podcasts, these NPR type things are pulling the lid off that one right when we need to. I mean, a day late, a dollar short, but better late than never. Thanks. And thank you for your talk.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you all so much. Thank you all so much. And we certainly look forward to, in the next couple of weeks, to Nell's presentation on the second half of this topic. Thank you all. So we're gonna have a song from Larry, and then we go straight into joys and concerns.
I just wanted to take a little chance to mourn all the people that have died because of the kind of problems we're talking about. It's hard to ask for help, as Trudy was saying, very hard, when pride is the only thing you've got. As we know, many people end up turning to drugs and alcohol. One night, he wandered into that old mission, the one down on the poor side of town. He really had no interest in salvation, just a place to lay his drunk old body down. He said, "Ma'am, I sure am hungry, and I don't have a penny to my name. Lord knows I ain't worked in a month of Sundays. I'm dirty, dead broke, and so ashamed. I need bread and water, man, that's all I need. Bread and water, a place to rest my feet. Ain't too proud to get down on my knees, for bread and water's free." She said, "You're always welcome." Sorry, I'll do this one. She said, "You're always welcome at this table." Said, "Brother, you look like you could use a friend. And there's no need to pay if you're not able. 'Cause even Jesus was a homeless man." Well, she opened up the Word and started reading about the Savior and the woman at the well. Said, "It ain't for me to judge this life you're leading. There's only two things that can save your soul from hell: bread and water, man, that's all you need. Bread and water, place to rest feet. Ain't too proud to get down on my knees, for bread bread and water's free. Well, he bowed his head, he kind of choked up. They spoke every word of our Lord's Prayer. He closed his eyes and never woke up. And he'll find bread and water waiting there. Bread and water, man, that's all you need. Bread and water, place to rest your feet. Bread and water, man, that's all you need. Bread and water, brother, he believed. Ain't too proud to get down on your knees, for bread and water's free. For bread and water's free.